So this evening, I got done reading an amazing article that was published today, November 9th, in the British GQ, titled, "This Man Ran the Pentagon's Secretive UFO Program for a Decade. We Had Some Questions." And I was so blown away by this article that I felt a need to go over some of the highlights with my subscribers and to give some of my commentary. Right off the bat, we learned that Elizondo's in the midst of being part of a new documentary. And the article also says that he has a high-level security clearance and is working for a government defense contractor, but he can't elaborate on that. This is a substantial interview that took place in the British GQ, written by Charlie Burton. So I'm obviously only going to share a small component of it. A link to the totality of the article is in the description below. Let's get to the article. The proposed new UAP office would have to report on health-related effects for individuals who have experienced UAPs. What kind of thing might happen if you were near one? Elizondo responds. A lot. Let me give you a notional, I've got to be careful, I can't speak too specifically, but one might imagine that you get a report from a pilot who says, "Lou, it's really weird. I was flying and I got close to this thing and I came back home and it was like I got a sunburn. I was red for 4 days." Well, that's a sign of radiation. That's not a sunburn, it's a radiation burn. Then a pilot might say, if they had got a little closer, "Lou, I'm at the hospital. I've got symptoms that are indicative of microwave damage, meaning internal injuries. And even in my brain, there's some morphology there." And then you might get somebody who gets really close and says, "You know, Lou, it's really bizarre. It felt like I was there for only 5 minutes. But when I looked at my watch, 30 minutes went by. But I only used 5 minutes worth of fuel. How is that possible?" Well, there's a reason for that. We believe, and it probably has to do with warping of space-time. And the closer you get to one of these vehicles, the more you may begin to experience space-time relative to the vehicle and the environment. Elizondo went into biological effects of coming into proximity with these UAP. And interestingly enough, that is one of the areas that the Congress is asking for more data on regarding what our agencies know about UAP. And there's a long history of people having health impact from coming close to these mysterious machines. And furthermore, Elizondo goes into an area of the phenomenon that I find absolutely fascinating, which is colloquially called missing time. Other people may reference it as time dilation. But there's a long historical record of people having missing time who later claimed they were taken against their will and examined by the occupants of the machines themselves. But it's not relegated only to people who claim they've actually been led onto these ships. It's also, apparently, according to Elizondo, pilots, for example, who come in close proximity to these vehicles. And the theory is that these vehicles warp space and time. And so the closer you get to them, the more your experience of time becomes consistent with the artificial environment surrounding the vehicle, in contrast to how time is taking place outside of that artificial effect from the technology. That's my interpretation anyways. Tying directly into that, what's the consensus around how these things fly? Right now, one of the leading theories out there is that someone has figured out a way to manipulate space-time and, in essence, master the idea of anti-gravity. So if you see a UAP moving left to right, it's not flying left to right, it's bending that space towards it. Correct. Current hypothesis is that it creates a bubble around it, and that bubble is insulating itself from the space-time that all of us experience. And so, therefore, the way it experiences space-time within the bubble is fundamentally different from outside the bubble. You know, some people wonder why I'm so obsessed with UAP. And I think the passage I just shared with you exemplifies the why. Imagine a technology so advanced that it can bend space toward it. It's mind-boggling. Imagine that level of mastery over nature. And that's allegedly the mechanistics of these extremely advanced craft using and harnessing a physics that is not yet in our grasp in our civilization. If there's even just a 1% chance that this could be true, that would justify extreme obsession, frankly. I only can imagine the expression on some of the faces of our greatest innovators, like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. If they knew for a fact that this technology exists, regardless of whether it's created by the hands of man, it means that it's possible. Why would we hold that back from our greatest innovators? Imagine the inspiration that they would receive from knowing this, that traveling amongst the stars in this capacity and fashion is possible. Imagine how it would enliven the imaginations of our species. It just seems so backwards to sequester this clarity of our universe away from the common man. Let's talk about crash retrievals and debris. Do you believe we have recovered a craft? I have been told I have to be very careful how I answer this question. I'm not allowed to expound upon anything I've already said. What I have said is that it is my opinion, my belief, a strong belief, hint, that the U.S. government is in possession of exotic material associated with UAPs. That is all I'm allowed to say. Do you believe organic matter or beings have been recovered? I am respectfully going to pass on that question. There's a couple questions that I'm really not at liberty to discuss. That's one of them. I wonder who he's been told by to be very careful how he answers that question. He said in this passage that it's his quote-unquote strong belief that the U.S. government does have material associated with UAP. And he said, hint, in that passage. And I think what he was communicating there is that his belief is predicated on evidence that he's seen during his tenure within the United States government, as opposed to just a personal hunch or opinion. But because of his non-disclosure agreement, he can't state that his quote-unquote strong belief is predicated on evidence he's seen during his tenure. So that's why he's only willing to say it's a belief. And the hint was to make you understand the dynamics here. Furthermore, he said that he could not talk about biological material recovered, which is interesting. I'm not going to say what that means because I don't know, but here's a fun little answer that's potentially true. It could be that he has some understanding that biological extraterrestrial or non-human intelligence has been recovered at some point. Otherwise, why didn't he just say that he doesn't know if that has been recovered or not? Instead of saying, I don't know if biological material has been recovered, he says, I'm not at liberty to discuss that. So that's interesting. You came to this not particularly caring about UFOs, but I've read there was a moment where you said to yourself, holy, this is real. What was that moment? It's funny because the people in the office kind of giggled and they were like, oh, he just had his epiphany, because everybody has one eventually in that office. But what convinced you it was a real thing? It was the overwhelming weight of evidence and data. I was talking to pilots routinely. There's videos out there in government that the public haven't seen. There's one that's 23 minutes long. There's another one where this thing is 50 feet away from the cockpit. I mean, it ain't ours. We know that. Sometimes you just couldn't believe it. You'd have 7 or 8 incidents in a single day. I'd get these emails from an admiral or a ship captain saying, Lou, what do you want me to do? I can't keep people below deck forever. These things are swarming my ship. They're all over the place. That's tough. I kept promising the cavalry was coming and I'd have answers for them, and the cavalry never came. Senior leadership didn't want to deal with it. Now, it behooves you to consider that the response to UAP within the United States government has been, in my assessment, consistent. Whether it's the former chair of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, Marco Rubio, or former Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, or even former President Barack Obama, or the witnesses that came forward during the USS Nimitz UFO event series, or the Roosevelt UFO event series from 2015 off the coast, I think, of Jacksonville, Florida. So whether it's military personnel or whether it's governmental personnel, former or current, they're all echoing the same thing. We are dealing with technology of unknown origin, utilizing physics beyond known technological capabilities. Period. And that is an accurate sentiment that I could prove very, very persuasively because the facts support that contention. Now, why are they doing this? Why are they saying this? Why is there this consistency that seems to pervade all of these disparate sources? I don't know. But I can tell you what I think. I think it's because it's real and the forensic evidence is overwhelming. That not only is it real, but that it's clear that it's not stemming from an adversary and it's not coming from the military inventory of the United States of America. And Elizondo said it right there in that passage. This is real. This ain't ours. And you know what? You want to know the very disturbing potentiality is that not only has Elizondo seen enough evidence that it's just abjectly obvious that we're not alone, but he may have only seen a drop in the bucket of what the United States has in its possession. And much of that data is probably within the realm of aerospace companies that have been hired by the United States government, but nevertheless, the United States government's interaction and engagement with this issue cannot be ignored. This is a very disturbing situation if it's real and if it's true. So you might even want to hope that I'm just not a good analyst and that my imagination has gotten carried away. Because if I'm even close to accurate in what I'm saying and in my assessment, then our world has been deceived on a level that is hard to even imagine. Why do you think they seem interested in military sites, nuclear sites particularly? I've got some very specific theories. Nuclear technology is a gateway to understanding unlocking the atom. And once you do that, you have a potentially limitless supply of energy. It could very well be that we are a violent species that is on the cusp of understanding space-time and no longer going to be stuck in our little cage. And that could be a problem for an advanced species because, we are not necessarily very peaceful to each other. That's as good as a hypothesis that I've heard as to why UAP seem attracted to nuclear technology, why they monitor it, surveil it, and even sometimes allegedly tamper with it. And it's not just ICBM installations, it's nuclear submarines and nuclear warships and weapons depots that house nuclear warheads and nuclear laboratories. The UFO historical record is replete with a bizarre concentration of sightings and interactions with UAP around these kind of nuclear-centric places and establishments. And interestingly, the proposal from Senator Gillibrand is asking for any information that our agencies have on the UAP nuclear connection, which of course is absolutely essential that our Congress be apprised of what that entails. When you initially spoke to the New York Times, were you worried about repercussions? I was getting calls all the time that the FBI was going to come and swap my house. There was a point when I got a call like, hey dude, you might have people visit you like in the next hour. So in the middle of the night, I had to stash everything, copies of emails, in my neighbor's barbecue grill just in case, because that was all the proof and the evidence of the fact that our government was really involved in this topic. It wasn't easy. It caused a lot of stress on my wife and my daughters. Until recently, they were still trying to come after my security clearance. Do you have a sense of why they didn't raid you and throw you in jail and instead let you carry on talking? My personal opinion, which I rarely give because I have no way to substantiate this, is there were enough people on the inside that said, look, he was briefing the senior brass and you need to be careful because if you squeeze Lou too hard, you're going to have very, very senior people come to his defense. This is a rather interesting passage, one that if I were ever to interview Lou, I would ask for an elaboration. Because as far as I understand, when Lou left the Pentagon to inform the world that UAP are real and likely do not stem from adversaries or any technology within the United States inventory, that this initiation did not breach any laws. So I get the impression from this passage that someone could have been willing to break the law by engaging in a raid on his house unlawfully. Now, bear in mind that Elizondo told Giuliano Marinkovic during an interview, I think it wasn't much after December 16th, 2017, that there was someone in the Pentagon that threatened his bodily well-being because of this action of coming forward and informing the world about this topic and the seriousness of it. And that's actually not very surprising, because the United States government has had a policy of secrecy and obfuscation regarding UAP for decades. And so for Elizondo to come out of the Pentagon the way he did, it could be perceived as provocative to those who are not in favor of changing the old policy of secrecy. In cultural depictions of UFOs, who do you think has got the closest to reality? I would have to say Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I just recently saw it for the first time, and I was shocked at some of the performance characteristics and how they depicted the UAPs, because that is exactly how they've been described in some, up until recently, very classified U.S. documents. What in particular? The description of how they do right-angle turns at very fast velocity, the illumination, the shapes of some of these craft. Steven Spielberg definitely had somebody on the inside that was giving him information, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of that movie that, if you know what you're looking at, is very, very close to real life. I must be living in a movie, because only in a movie would a high-level former intelligence officer, counterintelligence, in a interview for British GQ, be asked the question, in pop culture, what best depicts UAP? And he answers Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He literally cites a movie that he feels best depicts the phenomenon itself. And look at everything else that's going on surrounding this subject. We are collectively living in a movie. You and I, we're living in a movie. Because what is transpiring right now should not be transpiring, should not exist, and should only be existing within the confines of a screenplay. I think we can all agree with that. I mean, at the end of the day, we are discussing aliens, a effort by the U.S. government to conceal that from their own people and the world at large, and the final transition of them changing their policy surrounding this topic and being forthright with the public. That, my friends, is a movie, and it's an interesting movie. And I can't tell you how this movie is going to end. I can only tell you how it's going to begin. And in fact, if you've been watching my channel and staying apprised of all of this information, well, you're pretty read in on the beginning. I can't tell you where this goes. Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads. I'm sorry, I felt it, I had to do it. But seriously, this is a movie. You think because I've been following this that I watch this and I'm like, oh yeah, this makes sense. No, it doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. You think this makes sense? None of it makes sense. Bill Nelson, the administrator of NASA, giving credence to all this. Barack Obama giving credence to all this. John Brennan, former head of the Central Intelligence Agency, giving credence to all this. New proposal by Senator Gillibrand asking for information about biological effects on people and engagement into nuclear facilities, and even wanting information on whether or not there have been recovered craft. You think this makes sense? Are you out of your mind? Makes sense. Okay, maybe it makes sense to some people. I don't know if it makes sense to me. I'm just watching it, son. And yes, do I think there's actually non-human intelligence in our biosphere? Sure. Doesn't mean it makes sense. It just means I'm observing the nonsensical. I will leave you with a November 9th, 2021 tweet by Luis Elizondo. Friends, thank you for your generous outpouring of support and concern for my welfare and my health. Please know it's always quietest before the storm. I have taken a strategic pause in preparation of a major assault. All is quiet on the Western Front. I assess that the disclosure process will continue and will escalate, and we'll get greater clarity of what exactly is going on and the mysteries of our universe that for so long have been concealed from the public at large. If you'd like to support this channel, you can check out my merch shop. You can become a patron. You can become a YouTube member. You can give me a one-time donation. Or you can just slap a like on this bad boy and I'll appreciate it so much. And please don't forget to subscribe. I appreciate your support in any way that you give it to me. And I will see you in the next episode. Special thanks to all the YouTube members, patrons, those who bought merch, those who have given me one-time donation, those who watch my videos all the way through. Couldn't do without you. Thank you so much.